Okay, awkward dancing. That's the way we're starting. 100%.
Yes.
Welcome, everyone. We're here today with an incredible human. Sexiest man in the room. That is a direct quote from him. But we're going to get to who he is and why he's joining us a little bit later. I'm going to start and just say my name's Neal Ludevig. I am the host of Leave Looking Up, and I'm joined by an incredible human and co-host for today, Sasha. Sasha, take a moment, introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks. Happy to be here today. Happy to be back in New York City. Craziest week of the year, maybe. And yeah, just really excited to be starting this journey with Neal and our first guest.
I think that's a really good segue because you said this was the craziest week of the year, and it's one of the reasons why our guest is with us. So maybe give us some context. What week is it?
It's Climate Week. Diplomats from all over the world are here. Barricades, police cars, tanks, all sorts of stuff.
Wow, I was thinking like politicians, policymakers, change makers, but you went right for the security. You were like guns, armored cars. Yeah.
I guess that's what's really affecting my life. I'm sure there's important people in buildings somewhere.
Right. Well, so for the people listening, this is really cool because there's all kinds of energy and activism and change making in the air, specifically in the world of sustainability. And it's one of the reasons that we're able to be joined in person by a good friend and human, Benjamin Von Wong, who I have to say every conversation I leave inspired with a lot of homework. And it really makes my day, but I could go on and on and on about what this guy has done and accomplished, but I'd love to hear a little bit from him about himself. So take a moment, introduce yourself, and we'll dive into everything afterwards.
I am not going to humble brag on the show.
Oh, you should totally humble brag.
My name is Benjamin Von Wong. I'm a human.
That pretty much sums it up, yes. But yeah, he's more than a human. I'm going to give a little bit of the credit roll. This guy has done global change-making art installations that have been in front of the UN. He's done photo shoots with sharks underneath the water that are raising awareness for shark conservation. He's recently done a huge installation for an art project that went viral in the crypto world. The word and the images and the creativity that this person brings into our world somehow spans both the digital space and the real world in front of us endlessly. It's pretty amazing, and there's a strong history of influencing the people around him and not just in the digital space. So it's cool to have you here in person for that. So
thanks for bragging for me.
Oh yeah, that's what we're here. That's what friends are for. But I think one of the things which is pretty cool is this season is a little bit different from our first because we're really focusing on world building. People that they're heroes, but specifically world builders, that they're trying to use their life and their energy to create the world that they see in front of them and in the future. And I think we wanted to start out a little bit today in a little bit of a different way by asking, like, what world do you see in front of you right now? And what's the world that you envision for the future that you're trying to maybe bring us into a little bit?
Great question. I actually think the world that I see in front of myself is one I'm trying not to see. Ooh. Right? As a climate activist, as an environmentalist, the news and the science is all quite depressing. And I think the challenge is actually being able to look at what is depressing and still find the sense of hope and possibility and not kind of slide into apathy. And so there's almost this sense that we may see one thing, but we still have control over our interpretation and how we choose to let it affect us. And so, yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, there's sort of this idea where the more you're an activist in something, I mean, okay, wait, let's rewind a bit. The role of an activist in this world is actually to be losing all the time, because if you win, then you don't have a job anymore, right? And the world is constantly needing work, right? It's a journey. It's something that you just continuously work on. So if you only just exclusively focus on like, oh, we're not there yet. Why is it taking so long? It just puts you in this like constantly like frustrated place. And even though there are signs of progress, especially in the environmental movement, the trend is actually sliding down. Unlike a lot of human social issues, like for the most part, like pre-COVID, especially like poverty rates, education rates, mortality rates, all these have been on an upward trend. So you could, face the suffering and still say, at least we're on average going in the right direction. And so for me, the world that I have been trying to create has been one that is also just informed by my own need to find hope and possibility and solutions. And I'm super curious. Even you guys are also in that space, so I'm curious to know how you guys, feel about it all. How do you see the world moving, and how does that affect your perception of it?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with just the idea of hope, and something I've been toying with the idea of recently is radical hope. Like, how do we be in the face of everything that's scary and dark and just heading terribly down these wrong directions, honestly, and also find internally a hope? And like starting, honestly, what I've been focusing on, what I've been kind of learning about the last few years is starting in your local community, like your closest people to you first. Like, how could you be your best self for the people around you, for your community around you? How do you, instead of, okay, let's all like run away to some foreign place and start a new world together, like, okay, no, that's only going to last so long. Like, how do we bring the knowledge that we're learning all over the place and bring it back to our home roots? Like, change the neighborhoods we grew up in, change the minds of our parents. And I think that sort of avenue to change from the ground up has been something I've been looking towards a lot.
Right. That's an interesting idea of changing the mind of our parents, because I think there's a real generational look into like what hope looks like, right? Even like what is acceptable, what seems realistic. I like that. But it's also I like the smaller steps, like baby steps. What's the Bill Murray movie? Baby Steps. What about Bob? Baby Steps.
I was thinking about this idea of if you want to, I forgot who quoted this, but if you want to change the world, you need to first change yourself. It's that same idea of just always looking inwards. And I found thinking about things, looking at the world through different lenses to be very helpful. One of the most interesting conversations I recently had was with Tom Chi, and he was talking about how the way we frame the climate emergency is problematic, because right now it's framed as a zero-sum game. We either reach our goal or we fail. And I don't think there's a single person in the room that believes that we can hit 1.5 degrees C. Probably not even 2. Probably not 2.5. And so if you just frame this as a win-lose scenario, then you're going to have an entire generation of people growing up with the belief that they're screwed, that there's no hope because they've been left with a broken world. But it may be more interesting and helpful to frame change making through the lens of a multi-generational approach. What we're actually trying to do is create the foundation for people and planet to coexist for the next 300 years or 500 years or 1,000 years. And when you start thinking about it from that perspective, then it's not what do I need to do now from this like very frenetic place, but rather how do I position myself in a way to acquire the skills to help move the world to a better place where it needs to. And that's kind of a I think if you take a long enough time horizon, you can't really lose, right? You're simply reframing constantly your role in this greater picture. And I think it helps remove a little bit of the burden while not necessarily reducing the urgency, because people are going to get hurt if we don't act urgently, but it also doesn't make it into a pure win-lose scenario.
The way that you just framed this, I think, is really useful for what we're trying to demystify generally for the listeners and people that are going down this path. You have a really pragmatic way of breaking things down that could seem hopeless and be like, oh, let me just like reframe my thinking a little bit and make this more accessible or more exciting to what I think can really be daunting. And we'll talk about, some of the things that you've done that have been particularly daunting or last minute or spontaneous. I'm curious, like, if we're going back, like, when did that process start? Like, did you always have that, or is this because I know, and actually, if you want, or if you can, give some context for what got you here today, origin-wise, because you haven't always been an artist.
No.
I mean, let me correct myself. We're all artists deep down, but you haven't engaged that part of yourself,
right?
Up until a certain point. So walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I studied hard rock mining engineering, so that was my day job.
Rock and roll.
Yeah, and I studied it for 4 years. I worked in that space for 3.5 years, and one day I woke up and I was like, I don't know what I want to do in life, but I know 100% that it's not engineering. And so I decided I tried to get fired because I really wanted that unemployment check, and they wouldn't fire me, so I quit. and just kind of decided to start traveling. And it just so happened that I had picked up photography as a hobby, and it turned out to be a really good way to earn money while traveling. And what was meant to be kind of a temporary sabbatical ended up becoming a semi-permanent sabbatical up to this day, where I'm still kind of sabbaticaling and exploring and experimenting with how do I create a life in which I don't feel like it is in alignment with like who I am and how I show up. And so who we are obviously constantly changes and shifts. For me, one of the biggest shifts was around like 2015, 2016. I had finally gotten a really well-paid commercial photography job, ended up with a little windfall of cash. And I was like, okay, I've now peaked over the top of this mountain, which is what it means to be a commercial photographer. A lot of money. And I don't like it. Like, this is boring. And so I think the smart thing to do would have been to like milk it for like a year, build up that nest egg. Instead, I was like, nope, I got money. I'm just going to like put everything on pause. I'm going to take a year of sabbatical. I'm just going to start like experimenting with how can I make a difference with the work that I do. Because when I was thinking back to the projects that were the most meaningful to me, the ones that lit me up the most, they were always impact focused. And for context, like I was doing a lot of stunt work, like so tying models underwater, lighting them on fire, throwing them off buildings.
This is the commercial work?
This is just part of my brand. I was, just
doesn't like
I was an early
really
day influencer.
You also put them with sharks on it. You really don't like models, basically, is what we're hearing.
Yeah, but I was an early day influencer, and the best way to get views at the time was create those, those clickbait headlines when that used to really be a thing? Well, like I was just creating clickbait headlines. Like what happens if you put superheroes on the edge of a 40-story skyscraper?
Yeah.
What happens if you go to the world's largest monastic library to recreate a real world Disney Beauty and the Beast? And so these just generated a lot of visibility, which allowed me to get work. And so the big question was, is there a role for fantasy, awe, and wonder in impact? And I didn't frame that thought in that way at the time, but I was like, how do I make a difference? And I've had to sort of experiment with different fields of impact to figure out like where this sense of awe and wonder could help shift people. So the work that I do today is really around trying to create to showcase tragedy in a beautiful way so that you make it so captivating that anyone would be interested in it, and they would be kind of forced to ask the next question, like, what am I looking at? And why did this person do this? And hopefully through that gives you a chance to educate through adventure. So it was kind of this like one step at a time, things just kind of built up, and the projects have just gotten bigger since, the collaborators have gotten bigger. And how I approach it is sort of constantly changing as we all do. So, yeah.
Okay, so that's a lot. There's a lot of projects and works and things in that journey. Can you talk about the first one that maybe captures this experience? And like, I just really want to zoom in on that lens of the reframe, right? When you were up against something, you struggled, and then there was like, wait a second, I need to reframe this. I am learning new things. I mean, that is the entrepreneur journey, but at its heart, it's all of our journey. We're constantly faced with a little bit of discomfort, and you do that in a very beautiful way that I want to tap into.
For sure. So at the inflection point when I decided I wanted to take a sabbatical, so I, just for context, I had like, I don't know, half a million followers by this point. I was known for creating fantastical serial photography. My genius plan, and it's always fun to share your genius plans when they fail, was to quit photography and go into documentary filmmaking, because in my mind, documentary filmmaking was how you tackled complex social issues. So that didn't work so well, because I ended up just feeling like documentary filmmaking was, one, a very slow process, but also sort of depressing, because you're always focusing on people's problems. And yes, there's inspiration inside of it, but it lacked all that fantasy that I liked so much and adventure. So, but even though I was going slightly in the wrong direction, I don't think I lost anything, because I just learned how to edit videos and acquired a new skill along the way as one of the early users of a gimbal, and it was so fun. Anyways, and then I started to think. So my hypothesis then moving forward was, I have this portfolio of great work. I have a lot of followers. I am sure nonprofits will want to work with me. Except that because I had never tackled these different issues before, nonprofits didn't want to take the time, because I had no track record, and they couldn't envision what it would look like to combine fantasy and impact. And so I had to just figure out how to do it with the resources that I had initially. And it started off by, I guess, just coming up with really weird ideas and just seeing what stuck. So for example, first project, and this was actually born through a conversation with my ex-girlfriend. She really wanted to go storm chasing for fun. And I was like, well, what's the point of going storm chasing? There's no impact, and I don't want to just go out and for a fun journey. And she's like, well, why don't you just like put ordinary people ignoring the storms in front of it? And I was like, oh, that's a genius concept. That would actually, then storms could be a metaphor for climate change. And so we ended up going storm chasing for 2 weeks across the Great Plains of Colorado in a used ambulance that one of my followers just happened to have. And we would be racing these storms at 55 miles an hour down these small country roads in order to get ahead of them so that we could unload props from this ambulance and take photos within like 10 minutes and then like load it back up and go and just keep hauling out of the way so we wouldn't get swept up by a tornado. And, the project, I think, is not my best work. It's not like my most fantastical work, but it gave me hope. It was like, there is a place to combine environment and impact. Like there's something here. So I could just continue. And then the second time was similarly, it was about trying to figure out, well, I was still getting invited to teach photography, which meant I would get a free plane ticket somewhere. So I was invited to teach a photography workshop in Fiji. And I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to Fiji, what is there to do there? What are some issues and causes that are affecting this area? And that's where the shark conservation idea came forward. And so I decided on my own, unilaterally, that I wanted to do a shark project there. And I was like, well, I knew how to tie models underwater from my previous work. Can I tie a model underwater with some sharks swimming around? Obviously. So I went on Amazon, I bought a shepherd's crook, and I went to do this workshop. And like I landed there with no plan. I literally just started reaching out to local people. I found one follower that ended up being connected to the tourist manager that ended up getting me access to an introduction to a resort that had a shark scientist that said yes. And so within 10 days of landing in Fiji, by the time my workshop had ended, I had secured a venue that was going to provide me with access to sharks. So then I just had to find a model. I had to find a dress. I found like a BBC documentary videographer to come over. And we just created this project, like self-funded it with a bunch of volunteers that came through. And then retroactively pitched it to a nonprofit because, I was trying to collaborate with groups like Wild Aid and so forth. And they were just like, no, we're not going to fund you going to go tie a model underwater with some sharks swimming around. And I guess it makes sense, right? It sounds dangerous.
I don't know, it seems like a very clear pitch. Yeah.
But at the end, this campaign ended up generating 85 million signature petitions on change.org. It hit the front page of Reddit 3 times. It was just such a popular thing because it was so unexpected and so different. But, and then I'm going to end here. But I know you asked for one, but I'm just giving you 3 because I think the third one is sort of none of those other concepts were replicable. They couldn't be applied to anything else. But the third time I tried this, and now we're almost a year and a half into my sabbatical thing. The third one I tried was to put a mermaid on 10,000 plastic bottles. And this one happened because my mom had found a mermaid tail designer in Montreal, and I was going to be in Montreal because my sister was getting married. And she's like, oh, I think you might like this person. I was thinking, I'm like, okay, how can I tie mermaids to impact? Well, mermaids live in the ocean. Great Pacific Garbage Patch had just been discovered. Could I combine these things together? Started reaching out to friends. I enlisted one of my friends to just call recycling centers, and he said, hey, I got 10,000 plastic bottles for you. Where should we bring it? And I'm like, oh, crap. I didn't think that would work. And now I had to find a warehouse, and then I had to find the models, and I had to find the volunteers. And so literally the day after my sister's wedding, we spent a week bringing in my grandparents and my parents to help clean 10,000 plastic bottles, put a mermaid on top of it. And I think that was the first time that a sort of formula had emerged where I could use large volumes of material to create unexpected sets. And then that was kind of the foundation for a lot of the work that I currently do today, but I could never have planned it. I kind of just kept saying, I'm going to try to figure this out, and I'm just going to do it because I can't speak about what I do. I need to show people that I can do it. And I think that's just one really important piece. You need to give people what the lowest possible viable product looks like that is high enough to the standard at which you hope to present it to the world, and just prove that you can do it.
And I think also be passionate enough about it yourself that you're going to take the risk. You're going to get the model and the sharks. I hope she doesn't get bit. And all the things. But that's on you. It's not on some multinational. And so it's really your passion is what's driving this. It's not I want to be famous or I want to work with these people to have notches on my belt or whatever. It's really coming from that core kind of activist.
Right. And I think part of it too, like, because I don't want to take credit for everything, because all my projects are actually collaborations. And it's just the way I tick, the way my projects come to life is not because I think of some genius idea and I just power through it with the pure force of will. It's actually just, I love people. And if I meet people that I want to work with, I meet people with cool ideas or cool access to things, then we can find a way to work together. So my strategy is not so much just, keep drawing on a blank piece of paper, but rather it's just get out in the world, meet people, and be open to thinking of how you can work together and how you can align your values and your resources together. And I think that in that story itself, it's kind of the microcosm of what change making actually is. Because change doesn't happen alone, right? Change happens within communities. And so I think if we all lean into the strengths that we have, like maybe there are some people out there who just love introverting and thinking up new ideas, and then great, go do that. Like do what turns you on, do what brings you alive, do what your zone of genius happens to be, and lean into it as far as possible. And then who knows where it'll take you.
It's like we learn in reflection, the ideas, get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's allowed to happen. And I think that's just also such an interesting point to think about, like in terms of world building, in terms of how you live your life as a nomad. Like you're putting yourself into these places all over the world where it's fresh, and it's not like, oh, your same friend sitting on the couch watching Netflix on Saturday afternoon. Like you're always doing a different thing. Yeah. And do you think that like that nomadic lifestyle has also shaped your access in these conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I like to say that I'm like a really lucky person, and that things generally always work out for me to a certain extent. I mean, there are failures, but if you keep zooming out, like things eventually always work out. And I think it's because I operate like very much on like a non-chronological time frame. So I don't know if you guys have heard the nuance between Chronos and Kairos.
Just recently, actually. It's funny that you bring that up, but tell me more.
Right. So Chronos as chronological time, the 9 to 5, the grind, Monday to Friday. Like, I mean, you cannot accelerate your way through chronological time, but Kairos is a kind of serendipitous time. When is the right time to do things? And when you're nomadic, the right time gets distributed across the world. Like now is a really great time to be in New York City if you care about the climate, because there is a lot of people here. There are 140 heads of state here. So the chances that you could just be at a bar and meet someone really important that might change the trajectory of your life is actually higher. And so for me, when I've opened up to the world, it really enabled me to just grasp serendipity when it was there without having to expend a lot of resources. But it comes at a price, right? It comes at a price of feeling anchored, of having a place-based community, of having like deep friendships, because you're constantly moving around. Like I am a project-based person, and I just go from project to project in different countries. And so I'm rebuilding teams from scratch very often. And it's just hard to find that anchoring. So I think, once again, it's not for everyone. And there are different ways to make this happen, but this is what has worked for me so far. And now, as we talk about world building and transitions, I'm feeling like I'm at the point where I want to transition to find place-based communities. Actually, one of the things that I feel like I'm deeply craving, people that I can meet on a regular basis and co-create with and live within proximity of. And New York City right now is calling to me. But I went through this process of testing out different cities, different countries, different neighborhoods, and now I just kind of feel really pointed in this one direction. So
and just actually even taking a step back to give context, because we sort of glossed over it a little bit, the idea that you've been a nomad for how many years?
Basically since I quit my day job.
Wow. Okay.
Right?
So that's,
I've paid rent in different places, but I never stay in one place for more than 6 weeks at a time.
And there's such an interesting, that's a pretty cool thing that all of us,
I think everyone here
at the table is nomadic, right? And that like normalcy. Yeah, freaking yes. And I think there's something to this idea, and you touched upon it in the beginning, Sasha, about really touching your community around you first. And how that sort of impacts the lens to which, the projects that you do. So I'm curious to hear how this has shaped, especially like where you are right now, that you're kind of shifting to this why now has this kind of changed? And the other thing that I wanted to say that kind of brought up to being in the right place at the right time is, I'm trying to remember who said it, but this idea that luck is a residue of design. And I think what I heard from you reflecting back is, it's not just spontaneous luck. It's looking and seeing where you are very strategically and being like, oh, I'm in Fiji. Let me see what I can do. And the community connection, which is so cool, is let's see who is in my community that might have an idea or a thought or a collaborator. And that community seems like it's really evolved and grown and shifted. And I think where I want to get to with this question is, like, it's evolved to a specific point now. Why is it shifting to this now? What was the impetus?
Yeah, for sure. So I think I don't even remember how this started. But one of the big things that I've been trying to reframe in my life, or that I was kind of stuck, is this question of like, how much is enough? And I think this question it comes from a place of believing that if we grow up on a finite planet with finite resources, with infinite growth, then at some point we're going to run out of space, we're going to run out of resources. And so understanding how much is enough is like kind of like an important question. But we live in a culture of abundance, at least American culture, Western culture especially, which tells us like, no matter what we want, we can have. There's a workshop for everything, and there's an event for everything. There's a course or an experience or a product you can buy that can get you whatever you want. And so you can be the smartest, most successful, most financially, stable, most good looking. Like, you can do whatever you want.
Most good looking, definitely.
Yeah. Plastic surgery, they got you. But at what point does like abundance become excess, right? How much plastic surgery is too much plastic surgery if you want. But if you look across the board and you think about, and you try to like evaluate your life and you say, I want to be abundant in everything, then how do you know what is enough?
Yeah, what's the tipping point?
What's the tipping point for each one? And which, if everything is kind of like abundant, generally abundant, like, then where do you put your time? Where do you put your energy?
It's all relative, right?
It's all relative, and it changes, right? If you travel, like in the beginning when I was nomadic, I remember thinking this was the coolest thing ever, and now it's just part of my everyday life. And so our threshold for normalcy actually just keeps recalibrating itself. And by flipping this concept of abundance down to enoughness, it's really interesting, because if you say like, do I need enough money? Like, do I have enough money to do what I want to do? Do I have enough friends to feel supported in what I do? The nature of the question kind of changes, because now you can actually think about, it becomes very simple to see which parts you don't have enough of. And then you can kind of really simply prioritize down on that one thing that's not enough. And then I need to give one more framework, which is like, well, how do you know what is enough if you haven't defined what success looks like, right? Like, what are your metrics for success? And I think an interesting question I was recently asked on a wilderness survival trip was, what is your metric for a year well lived? And there's the work metrics. I think those are easier for us to give KPIs on. Like, maybe this podcast, you want to grow it to X amount, you want to get number of viewers, you want to bring in a certain amount of sponsorship dollars, blah, blah, blah. But then there's also like just personally, like, when you look back on your year, how do you know if you had a good year? And for me, I think one of the things, and there are a few pillars, but I think maybe one of them is that I want to be able to engage in at least 1 week-long immersive experience where I'm learning something about something I had no idea about prior, and just to be able to engage in those. So like one a quarter for a year. And that hits on sort of these core values I have of learning, of exploring my own curiosity, and of constantly growing and experiencing the world in a way that I can hopefully reintegrate back into my work and my life and my practice in some way, shape, or form. And so then if we now contextualize that question of enoughness, do I have enough money to participate in these week-long immersive experiences? Yes. Do I have enough of a cool network around me that can enable me to be in the know of these things happening? Yes. So on and so forth. And then if it reaches, and then eventually you reach a point where like, do I have a community that I can go back home to in between these things to feel grounded and co-create with and play with? I'm like, no, I don't have that piece of it. And so now I know, well, that's really what I need to focus on, because this is one of the things that matters to me. And I can deprioritize everything else. I can deprioritize kind of earning money. I can deprioritize creating more work. So if you have a really good understanding of what makes your you're happy or successful or feel like you're going in the right direction, then the rest of it can take care of itself. And all of this, I think, falls under like maybe a macro category of saying, what I'm trying to do is not to just lead a successful life. What I'm trying to do is to create the conditions so that make success in my life inevitable. Because if you have enough across all your pillars, then your life will be great. Like it'll become great, unless you maybe you missed a pillar at some point, and then you just recalibrate and you focus on rebuilding those conditions, reevaluating those conditions, and the success is kind of inevitable because you are well supported, you're well rested, you're happy, you're feeling inspired, you're feeling, you're well resourced, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I know these are part of larger guidelines that you like. What you call them, the golden guidelines.
My golden guidelines in life.
Golden guidelines of life, which I'd love to hear. If I'm curious, as you did you think about these practices and guidelines in a moment of things aren't working and I need to change stuff? Do you set aside thinking time for yourself to kind of ponder and, okay, I need to restructure and, I want to improve or refine? Or is this kind of you're walking to work? Not that you're walking to work ever, but which we've established. You're amidst photo shoot with said model tied underwater and thinking, what about golden guidelines? Like where did this happen? Before we get to your actual guidelines.
Yeah, I mean, these golden guidelines are things that I actually just started working on a couple weeks ago, and like starting to really write down and articulate.
Is it on Mythos One?
Yeah, I'm using a friend's platform
Cool.
on Mythos One, where I use it because I think when you write things down, they gain clarity in your mind, and I think I don't know if this is a rule or a law or whatever, but if you are specific with your asks, then the universe has a greater chance of providing it to you, because you can just I take this link and I just send it to people. I'll take this link and I'll just stick it on this email signature so that people can find me, or people can ask questions about things, or people can find answers for me when I'm looking for something.
You do. I'm just going to interrupt. You do a really good job of being specific to the point where I know emails from you at the bottom say what you're looking for and what you're open to bartering for, and what your life mantra is. And if you're in line with that mantra, please visit here where you can find out more. Like it is to the point I absolutely love it. I'm like, I might need to change my signature.
I mean, I love it. I feel like there's so many people often actually also in the nomadic space, I think, because you're moving place all the time, you really feel into your intuition. You're like, this feels good, this doesn't feel good, but that almost becomes an autopilot thing too. So what I've really loved from getting to know your work and inner workings of your mind through these things a little bit is just like how you have like created these structures around it and almost taken like a masculine approach to like the feminine ideas of like how you feel in place, how you feel in yourself, where you're trying to go, like what your intentions and what you're manifesting and things like that. It's like taking a very like almost academic approach. It's really cool.
Yeah, I think it's this idea of like agreements. So okay, when like if we rewind a bit and we look at like this idea of the nomadic lifestyle, or one of a self-designed, self-created life, and if you are in a fairly decent position, let's say you've accomplished a certain amount of stability and you have certain skills, you have a certain amount of network, like you have the minimum viable support structure around you, like I think there's a certain amount of privilege to it. Well, then you are essentially, no one is telling you what is right and what is wrong. No one's telling you to go left. No one's telling you what time to wake up. And so you need to have like, or I have found that I need rules, vague guidelines at the very least, to like understand how I'm going to spend my time and what I'm going to prioritize. Why am I going to go to this thing? Because you do have finite energy, you have a finite amount of resources, you have a finite amount of time, and you need to make these decisions on a regular basis. And there's this thing, I think it's if you create more rules in your life, then you need to make less decisions. So the more rules you have, then the less decisions you need to make. It's like if you wear the same clothes every day, then you're not. It's
like a pre-decision.
Yeah, it's a pre-decision. It's a boundary. It's an agreement of how you want to move through the world. And I think I naturally have done a lot of this stuff, but I've recently just tried to synthesize them all into a single place, because I had this realization that the way I move through the world as a human being is very different than the way I move through the world when I'm working. When I move through the world as a nomad, I'm like generally like really happy and carefree. Like for example, I'm here at Climate Week. I had 3 meetings. Those are what are things I needed to do. And then everything else could happen or could not happen, and that's fine, right? Like this podcast almost didn't happen, but it happened. And both outcomes would have been like not changed whether or not this was a good trip. because I had created, like, I feel like there was this container of what needed to happen for this to be a successful trip, and everything else was bonus. And so, wait, I forgot where I was going with this. My brain just like spazzed. What did I say?
Oh, different work and personal life.
Yeah, like you're.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank
We're
you
with
so
you.
much.
Rewind it back.
We'll delete that bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, work and personal life. So yeah, so okay, cool. And so what you'll notice is that this whole structure is actually, it means that I'm not very married to the outcomes. I'm just really focused on creating some conditions and some agreements and some rules, and then the rest of it I'm just letting go of. But when it comes to work, it's super stressful. Just like this was probably a lot more stressful for you than it was for me, because there are some stakes. Like you had money on the table. You're building something. You have a timeline, and so with my work, because there are high stakes, high dollar value, lots of collaboration, very tight timelines, a bunch of like just contracts, like serious adult things to do, then the entire process of creating my art is actually not fun. It hasn't been fun for a while, and I've been trying to figure out how do I make that more fun? How do I make that more playful? And so the genesis of creating these golden guidelines was, how do I find the Venn diagram where these two worlds intersect? Not that they have to be identical, but how do I consciously design the rules where both of these can coexist, just so that I selfishly can have a more harmonious life, and so it's less painful to be a creative.
If I can offer a thought that's coming to my brain as you're talking about that really aligns with this idea of community, right? I think the space that you came from and a lot of our impact-driven nature is choosing our collaborators and our community to be based off of what the possible impact or what they can bring to the table to make a project come to fruition, right? What would make things more fun if you're not choosing people based off of impact, you're choosing people based off of fun, right? And this idea, like when I think about my heroes in the film world, like your Quentin Tarantinos, your Wes Anderson, your Steven Spielberg, these people are time and time again working with the same people, not because in the beginning they were like, well, this person's going to have the biggest, they were nobodies at then. They just created a space, a community that naturally fostered fun and henceforth became something people gravitated towards. And I can tell you that I have the same way of thinking, that I'm like, who do I know that can have the impact that I want, as opposed to who do I know that can have, I mean, honestly, that's a little bit of what brought Sasha and I together, because I was like, she's really fun. And it's like thinking, okay, well, if you're coming from that space, a lot of times like that is, at least in this day and age of like social world and influencing, it's what people gravitate towards.
Yeah. I think I want to caveat that with one thing, is that I don't think fun alone is enough. I think you need to have fun and like a shared value system, right?
Yeah.
Like that intention of
Well said.
how you're going to have fun also matters, because you need to be going in the same direction. You can't be going in two opposite fun directions, because that'll just create like chaos. And I think artists are really good at sometimes doing that. They'd be like, it's going to be so cool. And then they just completely blow up their life by mistake.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking like, even as we're as we're thinking about who we choose and how we arrive to them based off of what they're proclaiming themselves and their identity and what they can bring to the table, this idea about labels and archetypes start coming into play. And I've noticed like something that you definitely adopt, I am a nomad, which is going to change. And like, I am a creative, I am an artist. Part of your community guidelines also talk about financial archetypes.
Yes.
Which is I looked at it and it was particularly fascinating for me, because finance in the world of art is something that I feel like clash so much. And a huge part of being a nomad is this, and even like a creative, is this idea of asking and, asking for favors and pulling resources your way, as opposed, and it really, I mean, all these things are intersecting in the idea of abundance mentality and scarcity mentality. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about this particular category of the many that you have, about the financial archetypes that you discovered for yourself through a book that you recommended, and how that sat with you to internalize those labels.
For sure. I'm going to address the help piece of the puzzle real quick. So, some people really struggle to ask for help. I don't. I love asking for help. And I think it's because I recognize that when people ask me for help, it gives me an opportunity to deepen my relationship to them. If I know what you need, I can keep an eye out for it. I can show up for you. Da, da, da. But if you just say, I'm good, bro. Great. Like, what do I get? Like, how do I stay in touch with you? How do we stay connected? So I need people to be like engaged in some form of struggle.
Moral of the story: everyone listening to this should reach out to Ben.
Yeah, reach out. Let's go. Let's be friends. I just think it's such an important part of connecting. I mean, that's what kind of how community is formed. Is because people can show up for each other, for the small things and for the big things. And with regards to financial archetypes, so the book is It's Not About the Money by Brent Kessel. And it was born because I was thinking of moving to New York, and I was just struggling. I mean, the prices of rent in New York, you're looking at anything from, I don't know, it could be like $3,000 to $10,000 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment, depending on how fancy you want to go. And it's just like, wait, this is an insane amount of money. Like, I can do so much if I was just nomading around with that amount of money and just had like the world as my oyster, as opposed to New York as my oyster. And I was just starting to feel a lot of that scarcity. And when I was talking to my friend, she's like, it would be really interesting. Her name's Elisa. She said, it would be really interesting for you to actually look into the story, the relationship that you have with money, as opposed to how much money you have in the bank account, because it doesn't actually matter. So the premise of It's Not About the Money is that every person is a blend of these different financial archetypes. There's like the saver, the empire builder, the hedonist, the star, da, da, da. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll just go through the 3 that like I identify as. So the first is like, I want to be an empire builder because in the impact space, if you want to grow your impact, presumably you need resources to do that, right? So like, I want to grow my influence. I want to grow my work. I want to keep impacting more and more people. And so that means I need to accumulate a certain amount of like wealth, power, and all the rest. And I'm also an idealist, which means that no matter, like, I already feel really guilty about what I have because the world is so unevenly distributed. And, you know, if like, I don't know, 2 billion people are earning less than $2 a day, and I'm here like complaining about New York prices of rent, like, do I even have a right to complain? And so the structure of capitalism bothers me. The fact that I have money bothers me, and yet I want more. And then the third thing that makes things even worse is that I'm actually like a guardian. And I think this just comes from my parents, who were born in Canada as first-generation Chinese Malaysian immigrants. So when I grew up, we were really poor. And so there's always this mentality of scarcity, of needing to save. And so the guardian archetype is defined by the fact that no matter how much money they have, they're always scared they're going to lose it because they always need to save for a rainy day. So they need just a little bit more. And so now you mix those 3 together. And so I want to accumulate more wealth, and yet every amount of money I have makes me feel guilty, and yet I just don't want to lose. I'm like scared because I'm going to lose it all. And I'm like, this is a terrible relationship to money.
I think I remember your description. It just said, here are the 3 that I am. This is terrible.
Yeah.
No anecdote or anything.
It's so bad. And so it's like, clearly this is not going to work. And so when you look at it from that perspective, then I think you can probably just start detaching yourself from your feelings, because actually this has nothing to do with how much money I'm earning at the time, or how much I have, or how much I've saved. It has just everything to do with my relationship to money. So I can feel scarcity in my body, and I can look at it and it can be like, this is just a feeling. I see you, I hear you, recognize you, thanks for warning me of all these things. And actually I'm doing fine. Like I am in control. I can find what I need because the money is a numbers game. It's like all in front of you. It's a spreadsheet. You can look at it and be like, oh no, I'm okay. So how we feel and what is reality, I think in the case of financials is actually really simple. And so most of it is mindset.
It's like labeling it, and you get the freedom by labeling it and naming it, and then you can back away and say, okay, that's just a story. And
right.
There's the reality in the bank account, you know?
Right. Absolutely. And you know, this doesn't like take away from, you know, other like real pragmatic issues. For example, I'm project based, which means like my financial flows are like spikes of like, oh, hey, yeah, I'm doing great. Oh no, I'm doing terrible. Like a couple of months just went by and nothing's happened. And so, you know, for me there, you know, that piece of it is like a separate challenge where I'm like, oh, how can I have like a floor of revenue that would make me more comfortable? Because, you know, still addressing those feelings, like where does that feeling of guardian, like how could I reduce the anxiety I feel around money? Well, I think if I had a level of consistency that would help. And so I think you can still strategize within those, because there's no point to like suffer needlessly. You can still build some proper frames to help you move through all of this. And I should probably also say that the best archetype, right? Like everyone wants to know how to be the best. The best archetype is to have a perfectly evenly distributed one. So it's actually you want to
a little
have
bit of everything.
Yeah, like you want to spend money on yourself. You want to be a
course.
hedonist from time to time. You want to spend on your appearance from time to time. You want to save money and have a healthy relationship. You also want to be somewhat naive about it, because if you just think about it too practically, it's not always helpful. And so actually, like being able to have like a healthy relationship to money involves more like redistributing your archetype across all 8.
I mean, something that you kind of brought up, which, did we ever talk about the Vipassana that I did? I think we did, right?
We did, yeah.
Yeah, like pretty in depth, but like the biggest takeaway, I remember kind of going around and people sharing their experience and all their takeaways and like, you know, the trauma that they were going through. And I very quickly invalidated my experience because I was thinking, who else should be doing this? Could somebody else be doing this better, or have it learned more from it? And, you know, one thing that I heard, looking at every single archetype and thinking, is one better? Should I have that one versus the other? Is an immediate basis of comparison that is ridiculous, because they're just archetypes just as a way to, you know, learn more about yourself. But this big lesson that I took away from that experience is you can't compare suffering. You know, this $2 a day for some people is completely irrelevant to the fact of how you feel. A rich person can feel just as bad as a poor person. And I think that takeaway really helped me start thinking, you know, just on a more practical level, like what I can do and how I can do it and why I should be doing it, and that it's okay. Like I am okay as a human, and that's not an easy thing sometimes when the world is consistently bombarding you with, you know, messages that says you are not enough or other people are worse off, and you know,
it's a great business model.
It is.
It's a really good business model.
It's the basis of consumerism, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that definitely.
That's what happens when spiritualism meets capitalism, as I'm sure you guys are all familiar with. It's like, great. Now everyone needs like a retreat every couple months because you're so screwed up.
I'm hearing, yeah, I'm hearing a lot. I mean, there's a lot in identifying yourself as you're confronting barriers and walls. Is there like, we've been asking a lot in origin stories, you know, for the prior season, what was your first heartbreak that really got you into this headspace doing this kind of work? And I think you alluded a little bit to it. I'm curious if there's any recent heartbreaks that is catapulted or catalyzed like a new way of thinking for you, whether it be shifting to a more refined community that is more grounded, or what's kind of coming up?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of all my breakups now. I mean, my most recent heartbreak was about a year and a half ago. We were together for 7 years. It was a long distance, cross-continental, monogamous, nomadic relationship. And you know, the breakup was not nearly as traumatic as it was just necessary and healthy and beautiful. And she's with another partner now, and I'm super happy for her. Because I don't think love is about ownership. I mean, our entire relationship was built on the agreement that we should be together only if we help each other become the best version of ourselves. And we had reached that point where we were not actually doing that anymore. And so letting go of the other person so that they can become the best version of themselves was just what had to happen. I don't think, like, I've always been somewhat of an introspective person. So the breakup itself, I don't necessarily think created any kind of major fluctuation in how I approach the world. I think my identity has always felt quite secure in, so it's actually more interesting for me to go back to previous heartbreaks when I was younger and more mature, because I have had like one.
And more mature?
No, less mature. Oh. Yeah. I mean, I had a day job, but other than that. Because I had one absolutely terrible relationship where, I mean, I think even to this day, I would say like that was like breaking up with her is probably the best experience of my life, the most significant one. And it was the relationship that catapulted me into my career as an artist. So I told you I had woken up one day and I was like, I don't want to be an engineer anymore. And so I had given in my letter of resignation, and our relationship was super rocky. It was an extremely unhealthy relationship. It actually brought up the worst in me. It's the only relationship that I've been in where I was like jealous, I was narcissistic, I was jealous, I was like constantly like micro following up, I was really controlling, because we didn't have like a basis of trust, and there were a lot of mind games and manipulation on I want to say on her side, but I'm going to say maybe it was on both our sides, because it was just a deeply unhealthy relationship. It was fairly short, thank goodness. It was like 9 months. But then when I got out of that, I realized how much I had lost the part of myself that I loved, and just had to like sort of rebuild like who I wanted to be moving forward. And I think a lot of my earlier career was actually driven by the need to prove that like I was capable of being a somebody, capable of worthy of being loved or whatever like that. So a lot of my earlier career was sort of defined by this struggle that I wanted to that I would just kind of lean into the struggle of the hardship and prove that this was no longer the case. And then most recently, I've been trying to flip that around and say like, actually, there's a lot of value to finding things that are easy. It's not because it's hard that it's valuable. Like you don't want your friendships to be hard. You want your friendships to be easy. You want your relationships to be easy. And I want my relationship to my work to be easier. And so for me, maybe the contrast is really in the way I used to break up and the way I break up today.
How do you break up today? Yeah.
I mean, the way we broke up, I think our breakup, we actually tried breaking up a couple times, and we always had like long conversations about it. We took it very slow. We tested out just having a break. And when we eventually realized that, we gave it multiple shots. And so like when it finally settled, we actually tried to just go skip the breakup phase and become friends right away. And it worked for a while until the friend relationship was just a repetition of the relationship with a friend hat on. We were having the same fights, and then we took a little break from one another. But I think like I still hold a lot of love and care and compassion for this person. Like it didn't ruin any on my side. I can't speak for her, but like on my side, really felt like, we really just wanted to be there for one another. And actually no, so we've always said that no matter what, we could go to the other if we needed help. And in March or April of this year, I was really struggling with my relationship to my work. And I was just wondering, I'm like, have I always been this way, or is this something new? And so I was like, well, let me reach out to my ex and ask her, like, have I changed? Like, have I become more stressed and more skeptical of the world as I've become more and more of an activist? And, to her credit, I got like 45 minutes of voicemails back, like 300 word kind of like little thing. And so like I really do think that we are still there for each other, and it's just not the time for us to be together. And I think it's just so much more better this way.
I think I've told you that the term that we came up with my last partner is like when you're partners with someone and then you kind of shift to that friend stage, but you still want to be in each other's lives and support one another. What do you're not quite a friend, you're not quite a partner, that we came up with the word supportner. And we're in a support ship.
I like that.
Love a good portmanteau. So yeah, and kind of really reframe like why we're in each other's lives to kind of support and almost be a sounding board for one another. I like that you've dived into your past self, and especially that's a very unique thing, I think, and a bold thing to have that reflection and say like, hey, let me reach out to someone that knew my past self and can give me that sounding board. What about your future self? I think, we're talking about world building. What would your future self tell you? What do you envision that future self looking like? And just describe a little bit of that Ben's world.
I mean, I have no idea what my future self would say. Probably chill out, because I think that's what like every future self tells to every present self. But let's see. So if we take decisions in our lives, like when we tell the story of our lives back to our friends or to ourselves, we're really good at sense making. So everything kind of makes sense. I can say that I am here today because I made this decision and this weird thing happened to me and that led to that thing, da, 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 da. And so when you look backwards in time, every decision was the right one. But when you look forward in time, you just have like all this anxiety over like, oh, what should I do? When should I move? Like, I mean, I'm trying to move to New York. Should I move to the right place? Like, what does the right place look like? Da, 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 da. And so I think one of the things that I try to reframe, once again, looking through different lenses, looking through different perspectives, is like, what if every decision I made was the right decision? And I just assumed it was the right decision, because we tend to think about decisions in a binary, like this is the right decision and the wrong decision. And sometimes they're just like different decisions that are equally good. They just won't take you to the same place. or they're equally bad. They both take you to the wrong places, but those wrong places might just be necessary bridges to cross so you can get to the right place. And so, I try to reframe moments of strife or challenges in my life as like, oh, maybe this will be the great low point in a future talk. Like seeing yourself as part of a longer storyline and trying to move myself out of the present and into like another state from time to time. But I don't think I really have like conversations with my future self per se. I could never have imagined where I am today 10 years ago. So like, why bother thinking about where I'm going to be in 10? 10 years is such a long, long time. Like, what would society look like? Who were you 10 years ago?
I mean, I feel like I was a different person last week, honestly. I'm not kidding.
Your rate of change is so much faster.
No, it's true. But I mean, is yours not? If you're going to these like immersive experiences 4 times a year, I think that's kind of one of the most interesting things. And then each opportunity to bring someone else into your life or to remove them, and like how that's done, how they continue, like all of these things, I think we're just an accumulation. So I will say, after hearing your 4 retreats a year rule, I was like, I think I'm implementing it. I think 100%. There's no reason, because right now I already have, every year I travel once nationally and once internationally, but I really like this once a quarter way to like, how am I like making sure to treat myself, to give myself new food for thought and kind of fuel for the engine. So
right. And for those who think that it's like kind of like selfish or self-centered, I've had to navigate this as an activist. You're always thinking about resource consumption, right? And so if you only think as effectively about your life as possible, am I like effectively managing all my resources, then it's very easy to justify doing nothing with your life. But when it comes to things like this, I think for me, it's almost like allowing for space for play to happen in life. And the reason I think play is important is because it allows you to discover what you don't know you didn't know. And if you have a good value system, like if you know yourself and you trust your values, like I personally, like my values are like kindness, curiosity, service, and freedom. So I really value those things. And I have seen just time and time again that I take the things that I've learned from different places and spaces, and I bring that into my work, into how I show up in the world, into my relationships with people. And so it's not actually taking, it's absorbing and growing and learning so that you can now distribute it back to the world. And when we think about the ripples, all the ripples of change that we create as individuals throughout the course of our lives, like that is significant. And so delaying your own development, delaying your own joy, actually I think like keeps you from being able to show up for others too, right? The more well-resourced you are, I guess if you are showing up in a non-selfish, self-centered kind of a way, will by default help create the world, the very world that you want to live in. And if everything is just a means to an end and not like an ends in of itself, then it doesn't really create a life worth living. And if you are an activist and if you want to change the world, you need to remind yourself too, like, why are we fighting? Like, why fight so hard for something? You have to remember what it is to live and to love, and to share that back with the world.
And like the people who you're meeting in those places too, that are like-minded, have the same values, and are going down these like weird thought experiment paths or self-practices, embodiment practices, whatever it is. And like they'll probably be the people that you want to have in your tighter network. I'm wondering too if like you kind of focus that around people you aspire to, people you're inspired by, and kind of who you want to be with in the future more.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all want to hang around cool people. I've tried.
That's why we got Ben on the show. Hanging out with cool people.
It's just like no one says like I want to hang out with ordinary, boring people. I'm
gonna say yes. Sometimes you just want to keep it chill, sit on the couch,
or shine.
Look at the wall.
Yeah. I mean, this is a natural desire to be attracted to like other people's brilliance. And I think I'm personally trying to get better at just cultivating a deeper sense of curiosity in myself. Like, so we're talking about like changing the world, and it's like everyone has something worth sharing. And I am, because I'm so practical and pragmatic, as you might have seen, like I sometimes just get bored of the ordinary quite easily. However, I'm trying to like get a little bit better at that. And to address this like idea of immersive experiences, I'm also trying not to make those necessarily prescriptive. So it's not just about having a retreat or transformational experience. Like I've been contemplating like, oh, what should the next thing be? And a Japanese tea ceremony kind of thing sounded really cool. Or learning how to like carve a blade seems like really cool. Yeah, like just work with a blade master for a week and learn how to forge. Like, why not? And and right now there's an interesting thing that's been going on. Like I've been trying to figure out like, okay, since I came up with this like retreat framework, then it's like, oh, which retreat do you prioritize? Like, what do you want to learn next? Is it permaculture? Is it like zombie survival? Like, I don't know, like what becomes the most interesting? And I don't know. I think for now, one recent thought, if I don't know if any of you guys pay attention to the existential threat of AI conversation that's been going on in space
every day. And wake
Do we
up.
have a choice?
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's pretty, like, if you talk to the folks that are the most pessimistic about it, they're like, yeah, you got like a year before like civilization is going to change.
Tops.
And then if you talk to the climate folks, then that timeline horizon's like maybe like 5 years. And so, I mean, then you're starting like, okay, well, if I have like 4 more experiences before society is going to radically change, like which 4 experiences should I be doing? So this is how you just fall back into that scarcity mindset again. But that's been like a recent conversation that I've been having in my head.
No, dude, what was the thing that you had on your golden guidelines? Like the intersectionality? Like bring the AI into it, man, and make them part of the experience.
Yeah, for sure. So so for the listeners, like one of the concepts is like, if we live in a world of finite resources, finite time, then you want to intersect as many of these resources as possible. So if you can hang out with your friends, like if I can hang out with Neal and learn how to do this Japanese tea ceremony again, it's better than if I just learn it separately, because then I have to go find time to prioritize Neal. But now I can actually do these things at the same time. And if you can do that and then make it relevant tangentially to your work, or maybe you're building a ritual into your everyday life, now you've like dropped mindset into this whole thing. And so there are ways to design your life so that you can gain more time by just intersecting more pillars of your life together. And if we want to drop AI into the equation, then we really invoke this timeline piece of the puzzle. And if we think like, okay, if AI is going to fundamentally disrupt the way we communicate and the way our democracy functions, then in those cases, which skills would be most interesting to have, harbor, or nurture at this point in time while we still have all the infrastructure that we currently are faced with? And so for me, that's like, oh, maybe it's a really good time to learn like full on, like how do you forage? How do you, how do you plant? Yeah, how do you plant resources? How do you plumb? All these like in general infrastructure things. But like the thing is, they're all equally interesting. Yeah. There's no right answer. They're all. This is my problem
in school. I was like, I can't choose a class because everything is equally interesting.
Interesting. Mine too. I'm a generalist also. Is there some common thread between
definitely
nomadic generalists?
Come on, we're like nomadic. We can't choose a place to live. We're like doing 5 million things. We can't choose a place to do. Yeah, that's us. That's definitely a theme.
But that's a good thing, right? Have you guys read the book Range? Why generalists triumph in a specialized world?
I couldn't pick the book to read. I was like, there's so many books.
You can listen to the podcast
while learning about Japanese matcha tea.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, the secret to focusing, Neal, is having a girl you're attracted to recommend this book, and now you will instantly prioritize it.
The reason I read Shantaram.
See, exactly.
That's a big one. Commitment.
I know. I was like, let's do this thing, but we ended up going out for a while. So
yeah. See, so there are tools in your life that can help you prioritize. You just need to like put them under the right lens.
Right. So, and I think that's a good segue into the people that we want to thank that are often unthanked, like that girlfriend that recommended that book. So shout out to Allison there. Who have you not thanked that deserves the thanks is a question that I have.
I mean, I think the most invisible partner on the journey are always your family members, right? Like it's interesting. I spent most of my adult life feeling like I was a little bit of a disappointment because obviously my parents, who are Asian, are quite disappointed that I'm not a doctor, a dentist, or a lawyer. I stopped playing my violin when I was kind of like 15 years old. And I'm still not married, and I'm the eldest son of my generation, and I don't plan on having kids. So like, we're really just crushing those milestones in the Asian family report card. But recently my parents had this conversation with each other, or my dad had a conversation with my mom maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, and he said that the reason that we worked so hard was so that our kids could do to not do what we were doing, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Like, this would not have been possible in their lifetime. And so what they've actually done is like created an entire foundation for me to become who I am today. And they continue to be participating in my life in very active capacity. Like, I'm flying to Toronto the beginning of next week to build an art installation, and both my parents are coming to help. Yeah, my mom's gonna like be there. My dad's driving a whole bunch of tools down. You've got 4 bicycles showing up for me, my videographer, him, and together we're gonna like build this art installation. And so like my parents are like super involved, even if they don't really understand what's going on in my life. And
I love it. I mean, getting parents involved. I had a friend that for her birthday every year she does a scavenger hunt. And this past year, I like stumbled in on it. I was at the Museum of Natural History, and I was like so impressed. She did a full-on day-long scavenger hunt that her parents were hiding in the museum for people to find. And I was like, A, your parents are awesome. B, you're awesome for getting them involved in doing this every year. Like, yes, 100%.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, I think, when I think of privilege, I mean, that's really one of the big privileges that I feel like I have. I have a supportive family that even though they never quite understood what I was up to, would still like show up for me all the time, like unconditionally. And we still argue. We're actually trying to figure out how to be friends. It's like a really hard process. Or like, yeah. It's like a little thing that we're navigating.
Podcast episode number 2: how to be friends with your parents.
Yeah, we figured out how to hug, and we figured out how to say I love you. So these are like big steps. But yeah, no, I mean, I don't see a world in which like I could have ever become who I am without a supportive family. And I think that's just, and we talk about like the self-made person, but like no one's really self-made.
No.
Right? We are created as a byproduct of both the privileged community. There's the whole cocktail of things that are required for us to be here.
My favorite Fresh Prince episode talks about that, where he's like, how did it go? Basically like, Will wants to emulate his father, who like grew up on a farm and was like hardworking. And then at the end, when he like is confronted by Will, who like, rips up a check and gets a job and starts failing school at the same time. He's like, I don't understand. Why did you do this? You don't need the money. I gave you the money. He's like, I want to be a self-made man. And Uncle Phil's like, you're an idiot if you think that anyone is self-made. Like, it takes a village. Yeah. So
that's actually one of the conversations I recently had with my parents. Was like, so my parents are really bad at living. Like they very much embody this idea of living for the next generation, as I think was quite traditional in the past, because lives were a lot shorter and resources were a lot more scarce. And so it's all about like making sure that your kids have a better life than you do, like making sure your kids have a better life than you do. And so you never actually figure out how to start living because you're constantly saving for the future. And I was recently trying to have a financial conversation with them when I was going through all this money stuff, because I was like, I'm curious to know like what does our family financial situation look like as you guys are getting older? And because I think that would affect how I make decisions in my life today. Yeah. And my dad was just like, well, that's like not money that you've earned. And I'm like, I know, but it would be stupid not to leverage the privilege that you guys have worked so hard to give me so that I can become a better and more effective version of myself, so I can show up in the world in a better way. And I think like this idea, it's like, I think we sometimes just think of, like, all these are just stories that we tell ourselves. At the end of the day, if you care about making the world better, then use all the resources you have at your disposal. And then I think our minds are the biggest barriers. And so constantly working on like trying to get rid of anything that's holding us back that may not be in front of us is like super important.
Yeah. You're making me think. I just heard Daniel Kwan talk about like the systems that we have in place that are just antiquated. These stories are, what did he say? He said, systems are just fossilized stories, right? And like rethinking the power of storytelling as an antidote for that, right? As a replacement for these future stories. And that's 100% it.
Absolutely.
I always like to ask towards the end, because I think we're approaching that time. What would you like our listeners to leave here today to do after hearing you chat and share these many, many ideas that are brewing and bubbling in your head?
I mean, I guess it depends what the listeners felt when they listened to this conversation. Were they just like, that's all bullshit? Or were they like, oh, there's some nuggets of wisdom in here? I think if there was something that you felt like you enjoyed, whether it was like one thought or one framework or one idea or one ideology, I think the most important thing is to put that inspiration into practice in the lowest, simplest, easiest way possible, because inspiration fades, right? 3 days. Anyway.
Talk about optimism there.
It fades. I mean, 10 minutes from now, you're going to scroll through like a bunch of Instagram things and you'll see a bunch of status updates and a friend's going to call and text and whatever. And so you're going to like lose the idea of like the essence of what you found interesting. So if you found one thing interesting or two things interesting, just like write them down and think of like how you can integrate that into your life. Even if it was just like a moment of reflection the next day. You know, we talk about these experiences as like really cool, like traveling to another part of the world or, you know, participating in some cool conference or whatever. At the end of the day, if you're not taking any time to integrate, then you're not going to grow, because it's sort of like you're just it's like taking a shower with vitamins instead of like eating them. Like it's not going to enter your body through your skin. You got to like find a way to like actually like ingest it, process it, integrate it, and figure out like how can this work for me, because what worked for me is not going to work for you, right? Like every one of us have a unique way of navigating through the world. So
yeah, that reminds me of something that I was like mulling on and think about quite often integrating into my life, is like those moments of boredom. We've almost erased them because of the Instagram, because of the train, because of the like billboards and everything that's going on. But like, how do we like bring those back? You know, is it not listening to music on the train? Is it, okay, I'm waiting for a meeting, let's not look at my Instagram for this moment, and like actually consider what am I mulling over at the moment, and having them in the notes or having them somewhere in their concepts or ideas, as you say, inspirations, but like actively creating that. And I can feel from talking to you that you are keeping those things top of mind, and then of course writing them down and sharing them, which is the next step. But
right. And there are many ways to do this. So for me, I'm actually like much more of a verbal processor. So sitting down, taking notes doesn't work so well for me, which is kind of funny because I have all these written down. But they're written down because I want to share them with people. People are my love language. And so, you know, I will leave people voice notes of like, oh, I just had this amazing conversation and I just picked up this new frame and I want to share it with you. I'll share it with my girlfriend. I'll share it with anyone who wants to listen to me in the next conversation that I'm going to have. And I just keep sharing these things over and over. And eventually, once it's being kind of like internalized, then I can convert it into word. And so if you like talking to people, then just find a way to talk to people about how this thing may affect your life or how you're contemplating working it. And then you're just basically prototyping it in real time along the way. And so think about how you change and then apply it, right? There's no right way of doing it. It's just your way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not black and white.
Never is.
Right and wrong. It's just different.
It is different.
Do you have any final questions? Any things that you would like to ask Sasha?
Oh my gosh, it's like from way at the beginning.
Yeah, go back. Let's rewind.
I was just really curious for a little more depth on the fantasy into activism and like the role of fantasy in your life. And I love the idea of storytelling, of course, but like the super hyper realistic into, you know, hyper crazy.
Yeah. No, it's interesting.
Fantasy into hyper crazy. Go.
Well, when I grew up, I used to really love fantasy and science fiction novels. I don't know why. I think it maybe just came from the idea that life was fairly boring when I was growing up as a kid. I mean, didn't go out very much because I was supposed to do like extra French lessons, Chinese lessons, violin lessons, martial art lessons. And so I was just always in lessons. And if I wasn't in lessons, then I was reading. And this was just like a way of escaping into some like crazy cool world. Then as I grew older, I think those were just the visuals that I gravitated towards because I like the idea of creating curiosity in my work, because curiosity is the foundation for conversation. If someone is curious about something that you've created, now you can have a conversation and now you can make friends. And friends are great. And so I started just doing crazier and crazier things because it's almost like a magic trick. The more magic you infuse into something, the more mystified and thrilled and ecstatic people are to like engage. And over time, I just, you know, as I became more into the activist world, I started to realize that there is a huge power in engaging awe and wonder in our everyday life. I actually started a nonprofit with my co-founder called the Awe Exchange, where we're really trying to study the role of awe in social movements and in climate, because in, like I was saying earlier, like activists are like constantly losing. It's really hard to get disillusioned. We need these moments of awe and wonder to make us feel a sense of hope and possibility. And I think art and storytelling is one of those ways you can do that. It's like the art isn't just about what you see. It's about the story behind of all the people that came together to make something possible. It's about, you know, the ideation phase, the process itself that gives people a sense of hope. Like, oh, wow, like all these people showed up for you, right? We see that and we feel hope. And so, like, I don't know, like I never really thought, like, I think when I first started, fantasy and science fiction and all this stuff was really about just what I was naturally drawn to. But as I've gotten older, I've been trying to reinvite that more intentionally into my life. I actually recently just started reading fiction again. I was on a nonfiction binge for like 15 years until I realized, like, you know what, I can't even imagine what a hopeful future looks like anymore. I've just like forgotten how to dream because, and you'll see this in a lot of popular literature today, like most of the worlds we discover in science fiction are dystopic, right? And it's so hard to find hopeful science fiction pieces that are recent.
That'd be a crazy book. It's just like everything's great. That's the end of the book.
No,
very short.
But there are new genres that are kind of popping up. I mean, they've been around for a while. They just haven't been popular. Like the solar punk movement is really interesting. A lot of Afrofuturism stuff that are coming out is interesting. I recently read a book that I really love. It's called Biketopia. And it's a bunch of independent female authors that are trying to convey hope and feminism through bicycles. And it's like, why bicycles? Because bicycles are like a symbol for change. When you think about a neighborhood getting a bike lane put in, that's basically a sign of progress, but it always comes with problems, right? Like there are always some people who are going to be pissed off about the bike lanes. And yet once it's installed in place, everyone is happy that it's there. And so this idea of like bikes as a vehicle for talking about different issues was really interesting. And these tiny short stories are about like 5 to 10 minutes of audiobook readings.
God, it's
like super short.
Yeah.
We're just kind of talking about everything from like little zombie flicks to like futuristic workplaces to space. And they were just taking these concepts and telling these kind of cool little positive worlds with their little dramas. As little dramas, you need to have little human dramas. We're never going to escape those. Yeah. But the worlds in which they existed were, for the most part, positive and uplifting. And I just feel like I want to find more of that. So if any listeners in here have access to fun fictional futures that they think they found inspiring, like I would really love to learn more about that. I have a website dedicated for people to reach out to me. Von Wong, VONWONG.info is just like a form. That's also how I find all sorts of places to stay when I travel, because in that form, I have one line that says, hey, do you have a place for me to crash?
I love it.
I have like over 3,000 people that have filled out this form. I have people all over the world that I can crash at, and that just makes traveling even simpler. So you never know what happens when you ask.
Yeah. I love that. I will say the next book you should read, if you want like little futuristic tiny stories, is 40 Tales of the Afterlife, David Eagleman.
Okay.
Incredible book about 40 possibilities of what the future and the afterlife could look like in all shiny toilet read sized books.
Love. All right, that's the next thing I'm gonna download. I was waiting for it for the next book,
it was incredible. So we usually like to wrap up with like a few super quick questions, which you should take 10 seconds or less to answer. No stress, no anxiety, but now that we're at the end of the road, Sasha and I will bounce back and forth between them. There's just a few. And I'll start out by asking, who is the last person that humbled you?
I feel like the longer I take to answer this, the more arrogant I am. I mean, I think I'm just humbled on a daily basis. The last conversation I was in was just a bunch of like UN SDG folks but people at like high level government policy talking about the problems they were trying to work on and how they were thinking of solving them.
A lot of humbling at Climate Week, that's for sure.
And you're just sitting there and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is like there's so much going on and I know so little about how change actually happens at a societal level. And yeah, it's just exactly one of those things where you're like the dumbest person like in the room, and it's wonderful. Like I love it. Yeah, and that was literally the last conversation that I was in
right before this. Yeah. So you were humbled right before this meeting. Perfect.
Absolutely.
We're gonna make sure that always happens to our guests.
Yeah.
Sunrise or sunset?
Depends when, in what time zone.
What?
I think you just broke our brains.
Doesn't it depend if you're on the East Coast or the West Coast? If you're trying from the East Coast to the West Coast, you know,
Okay.
one time zone works better than the other, and then you wake up early and you have a beautiful sunrise. And
Okay, you
sometimes
get
it's a
two
sunset.
then.
Works
West
well.
Coast and East Coast.
Ooh, well, I'm moving to the East Coast, so East Coast.
So East Coast, and then do you prefer the sunrise
Sunrise
or
or
the sunset on the East Coast? We'll be more specific next
No,
time.
I was sorry. I was explaining. It depends where you're flying in from. Like if you're jet lagged, like I oscillate between being a morning person and an evening person depending on which direction I'm traveling and how I've decided to reset my schedule and my cycle depending on where we're at.
I'm going to tell you, there's no way I could have predicted that answer to that question.
Completely
You're like, it was a simple question, Ben. You just had to make it complicated.
It was amazing. Okay, so let's see where this question goes then. Describe yourself in 3 words.
I mean, kind, curious, and of service. Values.
Okay. What's the nickname your parents gave you?
When you were little.
Probably pain in the ass. Some equivalent of that.
Oh my God, I love it.
Yeah.
And I think the last one, which I think is a great one to take us out with, is what is a good spy name for you? Spy code name.
I don't know.
That is a good one.
I don't
Plastic Man.
know. Oh, Ryan Reynolds called me the trash man on this documentary that he voiceovered. So
Oh my God, amazing.
yeah, trash boy.
Trash Boy.
I think those are all the questions that we have.
Yep.
Ben, I can't thank you enough for coming through today.
Yes,
from you
we made
and-
it.
I mean, seriously, humbled right before this. We've been humbled by having you here.
Amazing.
So you mentioned your website, vonwong.com. Where else can people find you?
Literally, if you just type Von Wong on any platform, VONWONG, you'll stumble across me.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So a lot of people stumbling across you. We can't wait to hear what happens from this. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for coming.
Absolutely.
I can't wait to hang out with you in the future everywhere in all different countries, and especially when you're settled here in New York. So
Oh, you moved to New York too. Come, we'll do something awesome.
Okay,
It'll be
great.
Great.
Okay, great. It's done. Settled.
Everyone
I
come
might
to New
come
York.
back.
Come to New York,
It's
everyone.
Okay. Everyone's
All
going
right.
to Brooklyn.
And we're off. There's that music. It's coming in.
Yours are sweaty.
A little bit.
I'm loving that that's still recorded.
You're sweaty?
No, I like the little distance. You know.
Oh, yeah. So you had it open here.
Yeah, I do. I'm all about the
You had some ventilation fluid.
needed. Yeah, it comes from one.
Right? Yeah.
It just stops, goes in, and then comes right back out. So it's.